and lowly, humble me join you. We're already cracking up. How you doing, Watson? Good to have you back.
Uh, Thank you. Thanks again for having me. Yeah, I'm doing all right. Yesterday, I guess I scratched my eye something really badly, so I was wearing an eye patch. But luckily, my eye's
I
a lot better,
saw.
and now I
Yeah,
don't have
and
to look like a pirate.
I'm robbed of the opportunity. I was so ready to just mock you all day and go
Yeah.
"R matey" and all this, and I've been cheated. I've been cheated.
Thankfully,
But
yeah, I got better.
in all seriousness, I'm glad you're sort of healed and that it
Thanks. Yeah,
wasn't
it
more
wasn't
serious
that
than it
bad. It
was.
just I needed the day. My eye needed the day off. And how about you? You've made a big change here. You're now what I thought was your basement.
Yes, I am now a confirmed garage punk astrologer. I have moved my office into the garage. Behind me, you can see shelves of books that I only just took out of boxes that have been in storage for 6, 7 years. 7 years, 7 years. And there's still, I haven't even, like, all these, you can see they're not organized. They're just sort of piled for now. This is about a third of the books I had in these boxes. There's still off camera here. Yeah, another 20 boxes of books. And we
Damn.
opened maybe 10 or 12 yesterday, and they fill up this huge shelf. So yeah, we're going to need a bigger boat or to sort of contain this. But it's great to be, I'd forgotten how many great books I had. Like, I mean, I knew I had a lot of books in boxes, but I had, there were certain things I have that I'd totally forgotten I owned, and it's really exciting to be reconnected with them. And I look forward to opening all the other boxes. So yeah, it's a bounty. It's yeah, Saturn storage. Stephanie Stephanie says, oh, yeah, indeed, it was a 7-year sort of period where I didn't have access to, much of my. I still have another locker, a larger locker full of books in Montreal that I'll have to ship here to Vancouver when we get a bigger home, if we can get a bigger home, because Vancouver is Vancouver. Yeah, when Axel Harvey, my friend and mentor, the great astrologer, when he passed, I sort of indirectly inherited his library. Yeah, I've been paying storage for 7 years. Just this locker full of like really rare old astrology books and some old like TV shows on proper like film reels that I want to convert to all this stuff that we really need to do something with. And now that I'm back in Canada, I can think about these things again. So yeah, it's an exciting time. I'm back in Vancouver, as I've mentioned over the course of the live stream. I was in Montreal because my dad had a health crisis, but that's all really nicely resolved now, which is especially good considering in April I was quite despondent about his chances. So yeah, now I'm back in Vancouver with my wife and family, and yeah, now I need a proper space to work out of.
Yeah.
So here I am in the garage. Punk as FUCK.
How punk.
How punk is that?
Yeah, that is real punk, Nick. Didn't your mentor Axel Harvey, didn't he have his Saturn conjunct your natal Saturn in the 9th?
Yes.
So he was kind of like your Saturnian teacher in a way.
Absolutely. I was born during his Saturn return, but it's even a little crazier than that, because Axel is the guy who introduced my mother to the man who would become my stepdad. And so there was, and when I started studying astrology in 1995, I came out to my parents as an astrologer, which I don't want to mock
Sure.
those who've had to come out under more serious circumstances.
Yeah.
Although I can tell you that I met similar resistance, let's say, that other folks might receive when they have to sort of declare themselves to their families. But anyway,
Right.
I came out as an astrologer, and the first thing my folks said was, "Well, you got to meet Axel." And yeah, that was just a magical thing. I didn't really know who he was or anything, but they had known him for so long that they had both known him longer than they knew each other. And Axel also knew my birth father, and I don't know a lot of people who knew him. So yeah, he was a really important teacher to me. And indeed, I was born on his Saturn return. And the only other person I can think of, the only other, I mean, I've had a few really important astrology mentors, some of whom wouldn't want their astrology outed publicly. I won't even say who those are, but the other really important teacher was Alan White, who he didn't have Saturn on my Saturn, but he was an Aries rising with Mars on my Aries Saturn. So he was also a really, really
Isn't that
just a
also Axel
huge
Harvey's
influence
Mars?
on me. Yes, yes, it
Yes,
is.
they had
I
Mars
was going there.
at the same degree. So both your teachers had Mars on your Saturn in Aries, and then the really big one, Axel had Saturn on your natal Saturn. That's really interesting. And then it's so
Yeah,
funny because you have been kind of like my astrological father in a sense, and
sure.
my mentor, and my Jupiter is conjunct your Saturn. So it seems like there's just been this is like continuing lineage like through 23, 24 Aries that seems to keep kind of
Just keeps
reappearing.
coming up. Yeah, yeah. And we started live streaming together right around when Jupiter
That's
was.
right. Yeah, Jupiter
yeah.
was around that degree, and that's when we started doing all this. So yeah, it's kind of cool.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. All right. Well, the chat is acting up. Wow, we already got a fair number of viewers, and we've barely started. We're just sort of reconnecting. You had the week off last week because your 12-year-old daughter had her birthday.
Yeah, it was kind of a birthday week. It sort of turned into a week.
Jupiter's gonna Jupiter.
Yeah, Jupiter's gonna Jupiter. So yeah, that was all fun, and she she got to do everything she kind of wanted to do, and so yeah, it was great.
Fantastic. Well, I wished her a happy birthday. My 12-year-old, I believe, messaged your 12-year-old with a birthday message.
I'll have to ask.
I think. Yeah. Well, she said she was going to. If she
Mhm.
didn't, well, 12-year-old's going to 12-year-old.
12-year-old's gonna 12-year-old. Yeah.
But they do have. I mean, that's such an interesting generation, the 2011. Like when you think astrologically, that Saturn Jupiter opposition, and with an exalted Saturn. I mean, I forget. Lucy's what 2-3 months
2011.
younger than. Yeah, 2011.
Yeah,
but she's a couple of months younger than Ianda. But Ianda
Mhm.
has like a perfect Jupiter
Right.
Saturn opposition to the minute.
So that's interesting. So does your daughter then have planets that are close to your Saturn?
Oh yeah.
So-
Yeah, and that was so. Yeah, she's my adopted child,
Right.
and she has Mercury at 25 Aries, and she was born 5 days before Mercury stationed retrograde, which means her progressed Mercury stationed retrograde at the age of 5, which is exactly when I came into her life.
Wow.
As a second dad.
Second dad, yeah. I wonder if that would be the extent of it, or if she might end up being another astrologer student of yours.
I mean, it's funny. Like when she was very young, when she was a child, I used to tease her, that she's such an Aries because she was kind of, we call her Miss Bossy Boots, so she was just sort of being Aries, and I'd say, "Oh, you're such an Aries," and she wouldn't know what that meant, and she'd just get sort of upset that I was teasing her. But now, of course, she's a savvy 12-year-old. She's on the Roblox and the TikTok, and so if I call her out for being an Aries, she's like, "Yeah, well, whatever. You're a Leo. You just think of yourself." she gives it
right back.
So
that's really funny.
So she's already at that stage. She's got her own sort of
wow
resource for learning astrology, whatever the merits of TikTok may be. But yeah, so it's the classic thing about having kids grow up that you can't, you might try to keep pulling the same tricks, but of course they're growing and they're learning.
Yeah, no, I've gotten so much sass back from my kids that like using like this like basically using my little jokes kind of back at me. So it's eventually we all get humbled, as parents.
The clincher for me was I was watching something related to South Park. I forget, it's video commentary or something, and Matt Stone of South Park was talking about how his kids just think he's a big loser, and I'm like, if even he can't
right
get, what chance do the rest of us have? I mean, you can't really get cooler than South Park. I'd love to have Matt Stone for a dad. Not that I don't.
Sure.
But I mean, that would have been pretty cool, I think. But apparently not. Apparently, you're still still just a big loser.
Matt Stone. He did. No, actually, no, not Matt Stone. Trey Parker actually is the one I'm thinking of. I guess he did he took a role doing the voice acting for the villain of the third Despicable Me movie or a Minions movie or
Was that
something.
right?
And I guess he took it on specifically to kind of do something that his kids would actually care about. So,
Right.
like his kids don't care about the fact that he, did this,
Yeah.
made this great contribution as sort of pop culture. It's the Despicable Me character. That's what
Right.
he'll get
Right.
their approval for. So
Oh, these kids today. These kids today.
yeah,
I've got the white beard. I'm finally allowed to. You'll get there, Watson. You'll be able
I'm
to
sure I
complain
will.
about the
Yeah.
kids today sometime.
Me the probably the most Gemini thing I think I've ever seen my daughter do was when she was really little, like maybe like only 2 or 3. She was playing with among her various toys. She had these like little plastic phones, and she would hold up both of the phones to her ears and hold this conversation between the person on this phone and being the other person on the other phone. I'm like, could you be any more Gemini
Yeah, no,
than that?
Excuse my French, but that's some Gemini
Yeah,
shit. Right
that is some Gemini shit right now. Like,
that's
pretending to have this conversation between 2 people on this. I just thought, wow, okay, she's a Gemini, and there's many other ways that kind of shows up for her.
Yeah, no, no matter how long a life you have as an astrologer, it never ceases to amaze how literal it can be sometimes.
Yeah.
Just it gets, because we're aware of the nuances. Like not every sun sign is like this extreme example of their sun sign. Most of astrology involves this sort of unique blend of planets and signs,
Yeah.
and the sun sign is just this sort of one surface sort of stereotype, really. We call them archetypes, but they get used as stereotypes very often. I don't, and with that in mind, it's sort of, all that being said, I guess there are always the people who are just going to embody the stereotypes and really run with them. And yeah, it sounds like the Gemini daughter is is one of those.
I also really see that moon signs like when we're eating at a meal, because my moon and Scorpio sun, he unfortunately, like me, is like, he eats very ravenously. He eats very, very quickly. He tears it apart. My moon and Taurus daughter, she's often the last one eating, because she just takes in and delights in the whole experience. She's very particular. She likes it to look good, and she just really savors every part of it. So she takes a long, long time to get through a meal, whereas the moon Scorpio boy, is ravenous. And then my moon and Cancer daughter, she's very, very particular about what she eats, and she's kind of just her tried and true recipes. That's sort of what she kind of prefers to eat. So I was curious about that, because I'm moon in Scorpion, your moon in Taurus. Do you tend to take time with your food, Nick?
I was gonna say, no, my moon in Taurus squares Mars and Leo. When I cook food, I'm Taurian. I'm patient. I don't mind taking like an hour to chop things or whatever. I'll put a lot of time into a meal, but that moon square Mars of mine, I think I've got some kind of, I'm going to have to spend years on a therapist couch to sort of figure out why I eat as fast as I do. Yeah, anyone who's ever eaten with me will tell you it's not necessarily a pleasant experience. I'm not everyone's favorite dining companion. But yeah, I eat pretty fast, and it's not
interesting.
A good thing, but it is what it is.
Anyone listening, make sure you chew your food several times before you eat it.
Yeah, don't otherwise this is your future. This is all you can look forward to if you don't. So
I've had to really mindfully slow down, so try to pace myself with my Taurus moon daughter to keep pace. But the other story though that I think is really interesting about your moon in Taurus is your whole like Bobby Fischer story. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah. Bobby Fischer and I both have our moon in Taurus at the exact same degree, conjunct the midheaven at the exact same degree. For people who don't know who Bobby Fischer was, he was a chess champion. Rather difficult fellow, personality-wise, but just an unbelievable and unbeatable, really. Well, until he stopped letting people challenge him. Anyway, I guess he made himself unbeatable by refusing to play matches once he won the championship. But that being said, he was very good. But he was so good. I mean, the story is that he had every possible chess move memorized, which is kind of the number of possible chess moves is really, 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 really high, and it's probably not literally true. It just seems hard to believe it could be literally true, but he was good enough that he could make you think that he did. He knew it that well, which is not unlike me with the.
So you're saying he was a human chess book, and you've been sometimes compared with being the human equivalent of a book of sorts,
of an ephemeris. Yes.
Yeah.
But I mean, I don't have the moon memorized. I don't have Mercury memorized. If someone tells me their date of birth, I can get a pretty good shot at knowing where all the other, like Venus out to Pluto, where the planets are, which sign they're in.
Well, you should know the sun.
Yeah, well, the sun, yes, but Venus out to Pluto. I generally know, and if I get it wrong, it's because they were born, just before a planet changed signs.
Well, with Mercury, got out of 1 out of 3 chance.
Sure, yeah.
I mean,
but I'm just saying, and you could show me any chart cast for the last 250 years, and I could probably tell you what date. Like if you had the date hidden, you just show me the chart and where the planets are. Pretty good chance I can tell you the exact date, or within a day or two of the exact date of where that chart represents.
That's really, really cool. And actually,
it's not that hard.
It's actually it's not too hard. Yeah, I mean, I feel like this is an important skill because it allows you to make connections quickly that you'd otherwise need to go and look up.
Exactly.
For example, I was talking with this woman once. She was actually our realtor when we were selling our house, and she was very personal. And so, she and my wife and I, we kind of we talk business, but eventually we'd sort of become more social. And so she would tell us a little bit about her life, and she was telling us that she met this person in late 2005, and they stayed together until late 2014, and then she recently got together with someone, but they had a big breakup, and that happened at the end of 2021. And I'm like, okay, we're talking about the Venus retrogrades, going from now they happen in Capricorn, but they used to happen in Aquarius and now go back into Capricorn, also known as Red
would have had to. Right, but it would have had to have been the end of 2013, not the end of 2014.
Sorry, very good, yeah. Nice
close,
job.
close,
shop.
But
I was just giving an example,
but
something taken. Like that. Yeah. Certain times I hear like that, I'm like automatically kind of starting to create an astrological chronology in my head, and just understand it. So then I explained it to her. I said, well, actually these times you mentioned, have you ever noticed that they're all 8 years apart? She said, that's really weird. And so we looked at her chart, and she was born with Venus in Capricorn. So it's just one of those things.
It can be quite reliable. But I mean, my point in doing the whole Human Ephemeris thing is never. I mean, it was kind of a joke. Like the name itself was modeled after the human fly, which was this guy who a sort of stuntman in the 70s who would dress up in a sort of superhero costume and climb buildings like Spider-Man would. It was just sort of this publicity guy, like tight rope walkers and that kind of thing. And so like the Human Ephemeris was the idea that like I'm some kind of circus performer who does some kind of, silly trick. But really, I mean, the reason I'm sort of, joking about that and promoting that, was really just to promote the idea that, memorizing the ephemeris isn't that hard. And if you're really serious about astrology, it's really, really worth doing. It's the difference between, like you said, just sort of always having to sort of go and do a bunch of legwork when you're looking at charts, as opposed to just instantly being able to zero in on, certain transits that people have had when you're looking at a chart and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Or even sometimes knowing By looking at a chart, knowing when a person is, has had a planet station direct or retrograde by secondary progression, like you can sort of eyeball these things and memorize them. And so, oh yeah, this person probably had such and such planet station retrograde or direct when they were 12 or when they were 20, and then, that kind of thing as well. Really,
I
really
find
just
it's
adds
really
to what you
useful.
said. Yeah.
Yeah, more than anything, it's just really useful. Like I remember for a lot of people that I was consulting about, like the Mars retrograde in Gemini, if they were old enough, I was able to ask immediately, going, well, how was the end of 1990, and what do you recall about June of 2015, and being able to kind of just immediately talk about these things. And then people would sort of look at me and act like it's some magic trick or something. Well, like, it's simple math.
Yeah.
Looking at Sun Mars alignments in Gemini, that's pretty much it. Or how Mars retrograde touched Gemini at the beginning of 2008. Again, you consider just it's not too hard. It's just and in fact, with Mercury, you can also exploit Mercury's 20-year cycle, because that it will
for
be
sure. Yeah.
roughly in the same place in the zodiac every 6 to 7 years within a given 20-year time frame. So if you have even just a couple of, sometimes I have a few like anchoring events that I know happened with Mercury having gone retrograde in a certain sign. So depending on the year or the month, if someone asks me, where was Mercury at this time, I might be able to actually answer with a little more confidence. So there are ways you can kind of wrap your head around Mercury. Now, when it comes to the moon, that's much harder. The only way you can do that is by, what I have been able to do with the moon, and I'm sure you've been able to do this too, is just memorizing that the nodes move back by a certain period, like 18, 19 years. And so you can roughly remember what sign eclipses were happening in a given year. But
but
I don't know if there's a way to know it as deeply as
it does help if you have some ideas of where the eclipses have happened and where the nodes are, but that's a lot more sort of thinking, working things out in your head than say the Venus and Mars synodic cycles, which if you know them, you can just do them instantly. Ditto, like Jupiter and Saturn. This is a trick Michael Luton taught me, but it's always useful. If you're looking at a chart and you see the sun is close to trine Jupiter or Saturn, that it's very close to a station.
Right.
And you can work out, like, if you know that, say if the sun is in Aries and Jupiter is in Sagittarius, but it's direct, and that they're obviously in a loose trine, that Jupiter is going to station retrograde. Because if the sun is in Aries, Jupiter will station retrograde in Sagittarius, or it'll station direct in Leo. If you see someone with the sun in Aries and Jupiter retrograde in Leo, that progressed Jupiter is going to station direct very soon. And then you look it up, and knowing things like, and it's ditto, it's very close to a perfect trine with Jupiter. It's a bit
very
wide.
Close. Yeah, it's pretty close.
And it's a bit wider with Saturn, maybe 10 zodiacal degrees, but at least then you sort of you have this sense that that everything about that two-dimensional pie chart, as useful as it is, there are all these sort of hacks, that you can do to sort of make it it three-dimensional in your mind.
The further out the planet, the closer the sun is to be to it, in order for it to be the station direct or station retrograde. Right. There are those exact degree ranges. I forget them offhand, but I think the fact that the sun is trine Jupiter really close to its stations kind of feeds into why the trine is associated with Jupiter, and why the trine is supposed to be more positive in general, and why the signs of Sagittarius and Pisces are each trine the signs of Cancer and Leo in the Thema Mundi. It starts feeding into that, the whole idea of the trine and of Jupiter.
Absolutely.
Tying back to that astronomical underpinning.
I've always, in the back of my mind, I've always likened the aspects as being planetary verbs. Like a trine is your Jupitering, even if like it's Mars is trine Venus, shall we say, Mars is Jupitering Venus, that kind of thing. Squares are Martian, sextiles are Venus, and oppositions are Saturnian, and I mean, it is an oversimplification, but it's not off the mark. in terms of,
No, absolutely
yeah,
not. I mean, it's foundational in it's kind of baked into these foundational concepts like the theme mundi, that
yeah,
exactly what you outlined, I think. And I think it's a useful way to think about aspects as well.
yeah, absolutely.
um and I like that, uh thinking about the planet as a verb rather
Yeah,
than, yeah, that's interesting.
yeah.
um
So, Pluto's back in Capricorn.
yeah, I feel like it, I don't know. I feel like I was kind of ready to continue with Aquarius. I'm like, all right, let's see where this is going at. But guess we still have something to deal
Just
with.
2 more
Uh,
ingresses to go, before we're really fully
yeah,
in.
I'm not so sure. I'm looking forward to these though. These particular um regresses, I guess you could say, is because my
Yeah,
sun is at 29 Libra, so
right.
Pluto's coming back for just a couple more squares.
Oh boy.
Um, the first square to my sun was because Pluto's transiting through my sixth house, and because the sun is my ascendant ruler. I was going through this period of intense worry and fear about my heart health. I had these kind of strange symptoms that really made me worry. But I went. I mean, I even like checked into the hospital, and you know, and they did this battery of tests, and they just said, no, it's nothing. You're fine. Like your heart's fine.
Well,
And then
good.
they and they even said, like, your uh your cholesterol's fine and your lipids are fine. Like, really, they're actually, you're pretty healthy, actually. And like, why are you here? And so I think, that's sort of a longer, larger story, maybe. But I think that, after that, I was just so kind of freaked out about my health. And I think part of it was because of ongoing stress about sort of just making sure I can like make it through each month, because when
Sure.
you are working as an astrologer full time, there's a certain amount of stress you have in trying to make sure you're sort of meeting that monthly quota of clients and
Mhm.
making enough. And so I think on the surface I was sort of handling it okay, and I was kind of offloading all of that worry and stress to some sort of sub level that you know was doing numbers on me, underneath
Yeah.
the hood. And so finally, it would kind of bubble up or boil up, as this sort of generalized feeling of, terror. And so so that was kind of the Pluto experience with the first. That was, I think I don't know that it actually gets back to the exact square with my son. Maybe it does. At least one of them does. The next one does. But so I've just been trying to take care of myself, since then. And I did feel a lot better after getting kind of the clean bill of health, and once was able to really understand what that was and why that was. But it's funny because I'd seen that aspect coming up for ages, knowing that Pluto would eventually square my sun. I wondered, like, what the heck does that mean? Well, you know, pretty
Oh,
literal, really, as
transit
always.
long-term transit anxiety. Yeah, astrologers should really have a kind of focus group for that kind of thing. I mean, it's something we all fall prey to. It's a, hazard of the job. Or, if you're not a professional astrologer, there's a lot of really good astrologers out there who aren't working astrologers, but you see them more and more as just, the general populace. There's really amazing people. But whether you are a professional or just like a really serious astrology student, um, absolutely everyone makes themselves crazy looking at some transit or progression they're going to have 10 years from now, 15 years from now.
Sure.
And yeah, and I mean, sometimes it's good reason. I had, when I started studying astrology, I got into secondary progressions quite early, and I saw fairly early, like within my first year or two of study, that I was eventually going to have a progressed solar eclipse conjunct Uranus at the last degree of Virgo in the year 2007. And I was looking at this in 1995, 1996. So it was over 10 years away. Um, and I was really worried, and I had good reason. It was even worse than I could have imagined. If anything, I should have had more transit anxiety than I actually did. In some ways, I was too carefree or optimistic, you know, to really understand the kind of hell I was going to go through when I had that secondary progression. So I don't
That
even,
was
you
the
know,
second transit of your first, wasn't it?
yeah, and
Yeah, and with all that, yeah.
yeah, Saturn was making its way into Virgo from Leo, and that was a Venus retrograde in Leo, but intermingling with the Saturn transit.
Mhm.
And then there was an actual, I think there was an actual solar eclipse conjunct Uranus not long after it. There was some kind of transit that mirrored, maybe it wasn't an eclipse, but there was some kind of transit that mirrored the progression I was having, just to compound it. And yeah, this was when my health fell apart, and I, you know, that, well, we've talked about it on the stream before. I don't want to keep moaning about it. But my point being that, you know, on the one hand, I want to sort of counsel astrologers to like not make yourself nuts looking at some far off transit that you're going to have. But at the same time, I want to say, like, don't underestimate it either.
Yeah,
Not that there was anything I could have done, you know, like
right.
sometimes, I suppose, like sometimes you can, at the best of times, a seasoned astrologer can really use astrology to make, you know, a really, really good decision that could change everything about your life. That can happen. But sometimes it's just, you know, like as in the case of like some kind of health condition that there, you know, there wasn't really anything I could be doing.
Mhm.
You know, the health problem was, yeah, it was my body. It wasn't anything I was doing to my body. In which case you're sort of sitting there waiting for the grenade to go off, and then to deal with whatever cleanup happens, you know. And that was the situation. Now, it does, in those sort of circumstances, it does help a little to have the astrology, even if there's nothing you can do, even if your life is totally miserable, and you have no means to remedy the situation overnight, and you just, you know, you're suffering in one way or the other. Having the astrology, knowing the astrology, does provide some comfort. It doesn't solve your problem, but it does, you
Right.
know, at least, you know, like, okay, this is at least sort of supposed to be happening. It's a little less mystifying. At least that was how
Right.
I felt about it at the time.
Right. I'm sometimes more disturbed if I don't really understand the the reason why behind something seems to be happening. Although that's usually because I'm making the wrong assumptions in the moment. Usually in hindsight, I'm able to kind of see how I was really like, for example, and this is kind of the opposite, where instead of having anxiety about an upcoming transit, I had sort of bigger expectations about a transit that didn't turn out quite the way I thought. So, for
Oh,
example,
we've all bought the lottery ticket when we had that Jupiter transit that we thought was going to be. Everyone's
well,
done that,
yeah, so
and you're
yeah,
lying if you say you haven't.
funny you mentioned that, because
Oh, you
like,
don't say.
well, because Jupiter was recently conjunct my midheaven, and that did have significance. If for the way you think it would, I basically like less than a degree from when Jupiter hit my midheaven is when I got the official confirmation that I got certified by ISAR as a, an official astrologer. I mean, it didn't. I know, I understand. Like, I didn't need to do that, but I felt like it was necessary. And that was so I did all the testing basically when Jupiter was going through my ninth, and then I needed like the final word on it, and so I got that when Jupiter was conjunct my midheaven. But I was expecting sort of a financial component to that transit because it was going to be making an opposition to my natal moon at 2 Scorpio. And it was also going to be making a trine to my wife's moon, and her moon is in the second house in Virgo. So we both will have, and she also has the moon as the ruler of the year. So I was just sort of thinking, like, you know, what is, I was basically expecting that, oh, maybe this will mean our, investing portfolio goes up or something like that. I was thinking of it in terms of money, but it was funny because in the more specific time frame that I was expecting sort of money to be coming into our lives, there wasn't anything out of the ordinary. But but it's really weird how this works because Jupiter just its only function is to expand, right? It doesn't always mean wealth. I mean,
No.
if it's expanding money, then yes.
Yeah.
But it's not
If
always
it's expanding
expanding.
if it's expanding your heart, you get a heart attack. I mean, it's
Yeah,
you know,
if it's
that is a
expanding, it really depends on what it's expanding. So in Taurus, it's expanding matters of like the earth and sort of earthly things. And so what's so interesting is, and I hope no one listens to this and thinks like I'm sort of bragging. I mean, I'm very, very lucky. I'm very fortunate.
It's okay. You can brag.
I happen to live on quite a lot of land. I have about 5 acres. And so this is more land than I know what to do with. More land than I need.
I think we're gonna have to revoke your millennial membership card,
Right?
because
No,
that's
I'm very, very lucky. I have my benefic of the sect in favor in the 4th house, and I kind of fell into this. It's not like something I necessarily deliberately sought out, but I was very, very lucky to get this sort of 5-acre plot that came with my house. And the right around the date that I was sort of expecting like this wealth to be coming in, we were talking about what we were going to do about this land, because I was just having to mow it, and it doesn't seem like it's really going to anything or going to any sort of good cause. But right around the time of the Jupiter transit affecting both of our moons, our neighbor, who also owns a lot of land, he sort of put in a word that we said we might be interested in having this person who comes to farm their land to use it for food, that he might like to use our land as well. And so we were able to sort of link up with that guy, and he said that he would basically till our land so he could grow crops with it for animal feed or for markets or for all these different things. And so I feel like that's a much more better and constructive use of the land,
well, for sure.
to go for food than it is to just sit there and be green.
Yeah, lawns are useful if you have grazing animals. Otherwise, like, what the hell?
Right. Otherwise it's just a chore, and I don't really care for this. So we thought this is a great opportunity to kind of do something with the land, and that's what Jupiter seemed to bring about, was to expand or to put to use this land for something more purposeful and more meaningful, or good. And so that's what Jupiter seemed to be expanding with the moon in her 2nd and the moon in my 4th. That's what that transit was about. So it did kind of it did end up being meaningful, but not really in the way that I expected or hoped for, maybe.
Sure. Excuse me. Yeah, the Jupiter is funny. I mean, it'll come through. You'll have the transit, but it is very easy to sort of like, hold that lottery ticket and like, come on, Jupiter, like, do your thing.
Jupiter through my 2nd house was about like really big expenditures.
Yeah.
When Jupiter went through Virgo in 2016, that was when I bought my last house. When Jupiter came to Pisces last year, that's when we sold that house.
Okay.
So it seems like, I mean, it has involved a lot of money, but money that went primarily into just our place, our residence, and things are so overpriced everywhere that it's a lot of money, but not necessarily increasing the amount I can have a month or something. I still working month to month. We just now have exchanged one pile of cash. But anyway, so what do you recall from Jupiter going through your 2nd? Did you win any lottery tickets?
Well, 2016 is the year that I moved to Cape Town to be with the woman who is now my wife. She bought a house. Now, Jupiter, I have natal Jupiter in the 2nd, but it rules my 8th. So she had just bought a house that she renovated over the course of 2016. We moved in May of 2017.
I see.
But it was sort of, there was that. The other thing was I did a lot of traveling in 2016. 2016 was the year I went to India for the first time. Had an amazing week in Paris with Anna before I flew to Cape Town. Later that year, I went to Russia. We took a train from Berlin to Moscow, and we visited Moscow and St. Petersburg, which was like a lifelong dream, and it's a very expensive trip. We kind of it wasn't wise financially, although I mean, that was going to be the last chance to ever get to see Russia. I had a sense of things getting worse and worse, and yeah, I had to see St. Petersburg before I died, and so we did that. And then later in the year, there was Anna and I went to BC. I showed her BC for the first time. We flew from South Africa to Canada, and she saw BC, and then we went down to California, where we saw you at ESAR in LA.
Right.
And we even had a few days or a week in New York after that. So there was a lot of traveling. And then even at the very beginning of 2017, we drove up.
Oh, it was kind of a Jupiter return for you as well. I forgot. Yeah.
Yeah. And we drove up in January of 2017 to Namibia, which was another place that I'd always wanted to see. It's a stunningly beautiful but utterly merciless desert. Think Arizona with no paved roads and no Republicans. No, but I mean, in all seriousness, it's a right. No, I mean, it's a forbidding desert. It's notorious, like the coast. Obviously it's right on the coast of the Atlantic Ocean. It's called the Skeleton Coast because this is where the ships always crash. The reason that the Cape of Good Hope is called the Cape of Good Hope is once you reached it, it meant you had survived the waters, offshore of Namibia. So it's this crazy desert, just so wild, so beautiful. And it was this year where I got to sort of have all these dreams come true. I was, falling in love with an amazing woman and going to all these places I had only ever dreamed of.
Wow.
There was, but all that was like really, really expensive. We might have spent more money that year than we spent for the previous 10 or the next 5 or whatever,
Right. Because one of the things I sort of remembered now about 2016 and Jupiter going through my second house, it wasn't just buying the house. We also had put a lot of money into renovating the house we were selling to get it to sell. And then when we moved into the new place, it was quite a bit of a fixer-upper, so then we ended up having to put a lot of money into that house right away as well. So it was just a big blowout with spending. It was hard. We have some questions here that might be
interesting. I noticed that. I was gonna touch on them in a minute. I had one other thing to say. I was just going to say, I started the live stream talking about these books behind me that I rescued from I had in storage for 7 years. 2016 was the year I took all my belongings and put them in a storage locker so that I could go to South Africa. So there was also this sort of, that was the most second house thing. These books are
and that's interesting too, because Saturn would have been squaring Jupiter in your second house, which is why it was about putting them in storage.
And there was the Mars retrograde with Saturn in Sagittarius that year. So it was quite intense. Someone just asked if it's smoky in Vancouver. We had rain yesterday, so it's really okay. Of course, I flew from Montreal on Friday, and Montreal wasn't as smoky as New York looked. Like, we didn't have that. What we did have in Montreal is the sun had that sort of hazy, beautiful orange look that it has in India, which of course is because of the pollution. The pollution makes the sun really beautiful.
Yeah,
if you've ever been to India, the sun is just stunning. Like, for the worst reasons. The sun in Montreal looked like an Indian sun.
Wow.
But for one reason or another, it did not look like what you saw down in New York City, even though like it was all sort of flying down there. I think the wind must have just pushed it down before it could.
I gotta say, Nick, I feel like we really screwed up our Mars projection. The Mars square Jupiter opposite Pluto. That's pretty much a most literal manifestation of like a big fire, right? Contaminated air with Pluto and Aquarius. I feel like we kind of missed that, because I think we'd said like we were expecting it to have to do more with sort of protests and stuff like that, but it was actually fires.
Right. And
exacerbated Mars.
And these kinds of fires, you get them in the maples of Quebec, you get them here in the pines of BC, and you get them in South Africa, but they're natural fires. Forests set themselves on fire. It's a purifying thing. It isn't always just some like careless campers who left their fire.
I imagine that we're also on a warming planet, so the worsening climate is this is going to make these things much more commonplace, and You know, I thought that I was going to be moving to more relative safety, moving out of the desert of Arizona towards the, you know, the lakes of Michigan, and you know, it's
Down
just
the road
dry
from
as a
Flint.
bone.
I mean, yeah, down the road
Dry
from
as a
Flint.
bone. Oh, yeah, I'm not in Flint, but I think they. I'm not sure. I think that situation's been resolved with the pipes. I think they changed out the pipes, as far as I
Was
know.
Flint
But
finally changed? Because last I heard it wasn't, but it's not like I'm not
I don't
watching it every
actually.
day.
Right. I'm unfortunately, yeah.
If
No,
if anyone in chat knows, has Flint been fixed?
But yeah, the it's dry as a bone, you know, here in
Oh
here
dear.
in Michigan. Yeah, we got rain for the first time today, you know, which is I guess really uncommon for this area. So
Well, I lived through like a literal drought in South Africa in 2017. That was quite intense. Like all the dams and reservoirs were like 10% or something ridiculous like that. It was serious. It was serious. So now everyone in South Africa has these rain tanks, rain collection tanks. Or, you know, you see them on pretty much every house, and we had them installed as well, which comes in handy. But yeah, that's really something. Like you know that saying, we're always about 3 meals away from revolution, you know, but like droughts are yeah, if you have no water, like things go bad
real bad.
real quick. Yeah, yeah.
Well, yeah, and that's honestly that's part of the reason why I moved out of Arizona, because I just sort of I think there's a lot of people who want to, you know, try to deny that that's as big of a problem as it really is.
Yeah.
Someone said the damming and water use doesn't help. Some places would be more moist than they are. Yeah, there's a lot of arguments people are making against dams.
Mm-hmm.
Now they can disrupt the local ecosystems.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, right now, you know, in Africa, Ethiopia wants to build this big dam, you know, to the Nile. The Nile flows from Egypt through Sudan and into Ethiopia, and Ethiopia sort of wants to dam up that river, which would really hurt Sudan and Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, that's a war waiting to happen right there. It's
Kai gave us an update about Flint. She just said that. I mean, they just said that Flint was in compliance in 2016. People still have opinions about whether that is actually fixed, though.
Right, and then Fortunamu says, "I don't believe the Flint water crisis has been resolved yet." Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you know, you can take a drive over and taste it yourself, Watts.
Right.
Another
thing that's really interesting is I've you know, when the topic of Saturn and Pisces has come up before, you know, I've talked a lot about dams. I also talked about this in my video, you know, the thirst trap video, Saturn and Pisces thirst trap.
You and your titles.
I know. It's my thing. Okay, I gotta have a thing. I mean, you know, it's better than my other titles, because one of my other title ideas for the Saturn and Pisces video was, what was it? I think it was something about wet beavers or something like that.
Oh, jeez.
Well, because of dams, because beavers construct dams.
This is a family show, Watson. What are you doing?
I forget exactly. It was something clever about beavers. But anyway,
Right.
So I've talked a lot about how Saturn and Pisces seems to have been present at the construction of these kind of noteworthy dams, and how Mars being in difficult relationships with Saturn seems to have spelled challenges for watery infrastructure, things like dam collapses. And so it's really weird because very recently, did you hear about
how the Ukraine dam that was blown up and caused flooding? And
I've sort of been expecting that to get worse as Mars opposes Saturn in Virgo. And in fact, the construction of the largest dam in the world, the Three Gorges Dam in China, was constructed when Saturn was like at 6 degrees of Pisces, and when Mars was opposite Saturn in early Pisces in 1995. And so we're having this Mars-Saturn opposition occur again in these early degrees. So it will be a simultaneous Mars and Saturn return, with Mars in Virgo and Saturn in Pisces, for the construction of that dam. So I'm a little concerned that there could be some sort of crisis situation at that dam. I mean, I can't say that it's enough to make a projection that it would like fall apart or something, but I would expect that there would be like news articles about potentially sort of a crisis situation at the Three Gorges Dam in China. Obviously, if it did break or something, that would be a horrendous disaster.
Yeah, I mean, China, according to some reports, is really sort of on its last legs, resource-wise. They import a lot of stuff, and yeah, that dam is one of the few things they have going in terms of like, really useful infrastructure. So it is a concern.
And Taiwan has threatened to like blow it up.
Yeah, I mean, it would be a silly thing to do aggressively, but I mean,
Right.
if China tried to start trouble with Taiwan, that would be an easy enough thing to do. Although, really, that whole, the Ukraine war has really sort of changed the Taiwanese narrative, I think, for a lot of people, because I think, if China did attack Taiwan and they were subjected to the same, what's the word I'm looking for, when we refuse to buy things from people? Sanctions. If China was subjected to the same sanctions that are imposed on Russia right now, Russia, it hurts, but they do export oil. They do, they do have industry. If China were sanctioned like that, you'd have billions of people starving in 6 months. So it's and then that dam issue alone could really be disastrous. Someone actually said, I think it was Crushed Orchid said, perhaps Neptune in Aries kicks off the water disputes. That's a pretty good guess, because when Neptune goes into Aries, it's joined by Saturn almost immediately, and Saturn, Neptune, yeah. The Ethiopia, Sudan, Egypt thing I mentioned, I think is a natural, one sort of obvious place to look, but certainly China. Let's face it, California has pretty serious water issues. That's a whole kettle of fish there, with a kettle of fish with no water in it, and
right.
yeah, there's just so many areas that this water issue can go wrong, and unfortunately seems very likely that it will.
Right. There's a whole chapter of Cosmos and Psyche that Richard Tarnas talks about, using the Saturn Neptune alignments as coinciding with times of watery disasters, giant floods, and kind of the destructive potential and the loss of life and culture almost, from these sort of realigning events, due to these like water-based disasters.
Yeah.
And it's true, they seem to coincide with these like Saturn Neptune conjunctions or oppositions, sometimes the squares. So I think that's a pretty good guess. Also, we know that I think the first submarines came about from Neptune and Aries, which is appropriate, given Neptune and having that sort of oceanic connotation, and Aries a sign of warfare. So
Yeah.
I would wonder if that conjunction, Saturn conjunct Neptune in Aries, that would be about sort of the prospects of naval warfare or submarine warfare sort of taking center stage or somehow becoming relevant again.
Yeah.
You wouldn't think so, because I thought we were in the age of the Space Force, but it looks like we still have the oceans to deal with. So.
Oh, gee, yeah, absolutely. We're getting some interesting comments here that the rash of Orca attacks on yachts in the Mediterranean. Yeah, that's been kind of interesting to see.
The fish bite back.
Yeah, right. I don't think they've managed to eat anyone yet, to my knowledge. But
okay, we're getting a lot of
content.
All right, so China has so Crushed Orchid says China has water, it's just not potable, meaning able to be drunk.
Yeah.
Because of pollution, it's carcinogenic. Whole villages aren't even supposed to wash their clothes in it. They drink it anyway because that's all they have. That's a terrible situation, if that is true. I'm assuming they're not lying to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's really difficult to purify water. I know that you can decontaminate water with like reverse osmosis. it's not enough to just boil it. Boil it will destroy like bacteria, but if you need to remove like heavy metals,
Yeah.
then you need to use sort of more advanced filtration
Yeah.
processes.
Yeah.
And so that sucks. Villages have all sorts of cancer. That's terrible. I mean, yeah. Vicky Nas says, what do you think affected the second bridge collapse of the bridge across the Ganges in India?
Yeah,
I'm
I
not
saw
familiar
that.
with that.
Yeah, no, I saw the news item. I haven't cast a chart for it, so I can't really comment on it specifically astrologically, but I saw that happened. The thing is that bridge, my understanding, it was built, it collapsed, and then it was rebuilt and then recollapsed. So yeah, I mean, it's it's a frightening thing. Mind you, just now, there's a chunk of the I-95 that
Well,
has
I was going to
apparently
say, yeah, I
collapsed.
heard about that.
So yeah. So things are sort of falling apart. But whether you're in India or the U.S. or Canada or anywhere, I think there's just been a general neglect of infrastructure. And this is true in every sort of part of the hemisphere. With just no matter where you go, the political discourse seems to center around any other subject but infrastructure, but the actual sort of ground underneath our feet, that's apparently just not urgent enough.
Well, maybe it's appropriate then that Pluto is coming back into Capricorn for a little bit as we are contending. Like, it's almost like Pluto and Capricorn's going like, all right, I know you guys are really excited about the AI and the future and stuff, but
we
still
have
got
some
sinkholes here.
Yeah.
Yeah. We still have the ground beneath us that we have to contend with and think about.
Yeah. I know Montreal is a real high sinkhole zone. And I always worry about them in terms of, just things totally collapsing. It's very sort of, the soil is very soft. This is why the metros have to be, dug so deep. If you've ever been to Montreal and taken a metro, you take a few escalators down in many parts of the city, like really, really far down. It's not like New York City where the subway can be virtually underneath the street. So yeah, that's one place that I worry about sinkholes. But yeah, I think just wherever you go, there's a real visible neglect of infrastructure, and even India, you can understand with as many people as they do, it's much more difficult to sort of manage infrastructure. But you would expect the U.S. or Canada, who have in the past built solid infrastructure, to suddenly sort of let go of the the will. I don't know what it is. It's always sort of baffled me why anyone, no matter how sort of motivated they are by any other political, subject area, wouldn't, treat this as a really.
Yeah, well, if it's about guns, then it seems like we have no shortage of cash. If it's about weapons to blow people up, we just have money's never an issue then. It's only ever an issue when it's about like the basics of a society, whether for people's welfare, for people's health care, for people's education, for infrastructure. Things that even shouldn't be political end up sort of being like politicized. And it's just like, do you not need streets to walk on? Do you not need bridges that don't fall down? Like,
it's one thing left wingers and right wingers would have in common. We all got to sort of like walk around and not fall into some cavern in the middle of the ground that could have easily been prevented.
Yeah, I mean, unless it's like military, it seems it's very difficult to get the governing bodies to approve the money. It's not like it doesn't have the cash. It's one of the wealthiest countries in the world, if not the wealthiest. So yeah, it's a matter of priorities, and it always kind of has been. Not saying I like Joe Biden or anything, but he did have an interesting quote when he was a senator where he said, "If you don't tell me what you value, show me your budget. I'll tell you what you value."
That's a good quote.
That is a good quote.
Yeah.
That is a good quote. And to his credit, he did try to get an infrastructure bill passed. It was obviously a lot less than what is needed, but I mean, there's nothing in it, so that's something. But it's not just the US, as you mentioned. We need a digital infrastructure, and we need the physical infrastructure to match the sort of needs of the coming century.
Yeah. It seems like a lot of things are just coming apart, and even things that were working fine get sabotaged. Like the Nord Stream pipeline being blown up because of the war, and I don't like whoever you think is responsible for that. Like the fact that it was done, that it's this ecological disaster, and it's just
that was actually interesting thing about the Nord Stream pipeline. That was it was basically they completed the construction of it when Neptune entered Pisces. So it kind of came into operation and existence at the Neptune going into Pisces. And then at the time that it blew up, that was when Mars was beginning to station retrograde in Gemini, square
the Neptune
in Pisces. And so, what happens? It blows up.
So literal. Yeah. That's crazy.
Wild.
I just finished reading a biography of Putin, written by Philip Short. I've read a few, but the one by Philip Short is really good. It's the most recent. And there's a passage in there where, going back a couple of decades, when Putin was trying to convince, I think it was the king of Sweden, or one of the sort of Scandinavian, monarchs or whatever, to sort of get behind the Nord Stream pipeline. And it turned out this particular king or prince was like really well educated in terms of ecology, and gave Putin this huge sermon of why, like, it was, not such a great idea. And Putin was totally taken aback. Like, he's not expecting royals to be, hey, they have a lot of time in their hands. They can do some reading. If they're decent human beings, they might be worth something, So that was just kind of funny to be reminded of another time when that was like this big sort of, hope of tying the world together by industry. That adage that, what's his name? Thomas, I forget his name, the writer, he talked about how no two countries that have a McDonald's would ever go to war. Thomas Friedman. And that seemed like, oh, what a wise piece of, what a wise observation. And back in 2010 or whenever it was, it still seemed like, okay, that's something. At least we got like the McDonald's piece, but yeah, so much for that.
Wow. So let's see. Someone said, Ethereal Synchronicity 444 says, Watson reminds me of a guy I met at work. His son is on my descendant. LOL. Cool.
All right. AM says Winnipeg has a lot of potholes. Winnipeg cannot compete with Montreal for potholes. I've been to Winnipeg. Like, sure, you got some. You go out to the Atlantic provinces, they got some. But I'm sorry, Montreal tops everyone for the potholes. It's insane. Insane. One thing I keep wanting to do when I'm in Montreal, I wanted to do it this time too, but I never sort of screw up the courage, is to go around with some seeds and some dirt and to fill in, like, plant flowers in all the potholes. So the rains bring up these flowers in the middle of the road, as a kind of, soft protest for the infrastructure.
Crushed Orchid says, so when Saturn hits Aries, will that light a fire under the government to start new infrastructure projects? I mean, in general, Aries is a sign of initiation. When I look at past sort of major infrastructure projects, though, they're taking place under like Saturn-Uranus conjunctions or Saturn-Uranus squares. That's where the last infrastructure bill came from, was the Saturn-Uranus square that we just got out of, with Saturn Aquarius square, Uranus and Taurus. The interstate freeway system was authorized under Saturn and Sagittarius. That's when they put the first tarmac down, which is about creating bridges between places. So sometimes when Saturn's going through the mutable signs, it will kind of build the infrastructure relating to things that are in motion or in between places. So you get a railway system emerging from Saturn with immutable signs. Like I mentioned, Watery infrastructure projects with Saturn in Pisces.
The Montreal Metro was built when Saturn in Pisces was opposite Uranus in Virgo. Yeah,
there
leading up to the Expo 67. So and that involved, you know, tunneling under the river and all this stuff.
Yeah, one of the things I've written about. Sorry if you've heard that my phone's going off. One of the things that I noticed about Saturn in Aries, and I wrote an article about this on my website, is, at least in the United States, well, actually internationally as well, that one common theme of Saturn in Aries transits is that they are times when the government takes concrete, practical steps to limit weapons, right? Because if Aries is ruled by Mars, the planet of weapons, and Saturn is the principle of limitation and regulation, then it makes sense that Saturn in Aries would bring about sort of gun control measures. So, for example, back in 1998, when Saturn was lost in Aries, the Dunblane massacre, you know, that caused, you know, the UK to completely ban guns, and in Australia as well. In that same time period, they had an event that was kind of like the Newtown shooting, you know, where little kids were killed, and it was like, nope, no more guns. And you know, and actually in the United States, even though the United States didn't enact any gun control measures in that time, the provisions of a handgun bill that had been passed a few years earlier came into effect. So that, like, this FBI background check system came into effect during the Saturn and Aries system. The FBI was formed during a Saturn and Aries period. Some of the sort of consequential Supreme Court decisions surrounding gun control happened during Saturn and Aries periods. I kind of outlined a bunch of them in the article, but I think one other kind of funny thing about Saturn and Aries is the Second Amendment itself was ratified while Saturn was in Aries. So this goes back a ways, you know.
That's a good find.
So I think one of the interesting implications of that is that that would seem to indicate in 2025 that new incoming government for the United States would have to be one that is more amenable to gun control. For whatever reason, that will be the right moment. I mean, it should have happened yesterday, right? Years ago, but it seems like we'll enter this one little window when Saturn's in Aries where something actionable, something real or practical, you know, can potentially be passed to sort of limit the damage, you know, that these weapons can do. So that's one of the things I'm actually expecting that I'm a little more optimistic about, is I think that there actually will be some progress made on gun control. And I'm not apologizing for being, you know, happy about that. You know, well, as a human being living in this country, I have to, you know, I'm sure. I'm not with the gun nuts. Sorry.
Yeah. The interesting thing I've noticed when it comes to sort of de-escalating weapons, that actually Venus retrogrades have been really important in terms of like nuclear banning treaties and things of that nature, and other peace treaties. And I actually have a little slideshow I can show to illustrate that. But what's interesting is the way this merges is in 2025. We get a Venus retrograde in Aries,
with that
exactly. So everything does sort of coalesce in the spring of 2025. The northern hemisphere spring of 2025. My apologies, southern hemispherites. But yeah, that period in 2025, I think, you know, given these two theses we have that sort of merge at that time, I think that's really something. Should I quickly show? It's just a few slides.
Sure, please do.
Yeah, just a little illustration. This isn't so much about gun control as it is about sort of weapons bans. Here we go. As usual, I can't just play the slide because then it makes this thing blurry. So this is why I do things the way I do. I'll just start at the start. It's just a few slides. Peace of Paris signed at Versailles. This is the treaty that ended the American Revolutionary War, and Venus was 27 days pre-retrograde when it was signed. This is the Germans surrendering, the Nazis surrendering at World War II. Venus literally stationing direct in Aries on this day. this was an agreement, but for the non-alignment nations. Tito of Yugoslavia, Nehru of India, Nasser of Egypt. They were also joined by Haile Selassie of Ethiopia, and what's his name from Indonesia, whose name is slipping my mind right now. But yeah, these were nations that didn't want to align with the United States or with the Soviet Union during the Cold War. Then there's also so that was a Venus retrograde. Actually, before I go on, everyone involved here died during a Venus retrograde. Nasser died during a red 2. Tito died during a red 3. Nehru also died during a red 3. Haile Selassie died during a red 5. And Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah died during a red 3 as well, and he was also really instrumental in the non-alignment movement. Anyway, moving ahead, the Cuban Missile Crisis. This was a Venus retrograde. Now, you think of this as being this sort of big military scare, but this did result in a lot of sort of new understanding between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. And this is the reason we got a red phone between the two, headquarters, the White House and the Kremlin. So that things could be resolved without resorting to nuclear war. And of course, this is one of those times that we came very, very close. Jimmy Carter's Camp David Accords between Egypt and Israel. This brought about a lasting peace that maintains to this day. So this is 30 days before the retrograde station in a red 2. Gorbachev and Reagan meeting in Reykjavik. This led the way, as we'll see in a sec, to further sort of nuclear agreements between them. Actually, I don't have a try. And what would happen is at the next red 3 in Moscow, Reagan went to Moscow, and that was when the SALT II stuff was not SALT II, but sort of what should have been SALT II, the new sort of nuclear. I think it was a ban on ballistic missiles. And then just going back a bit, the first sort of anti-nuclear treaty, Nixon and Brezhnev signing SALT I as Venus was stationing retrograde in Cancer. And then also the famous Truth and Reconciliation hearings in South Africa with the fall of apartheid. And this was people from all sides of the struggle sort of coming forward and confessing their crimes. And, there was, the intention was to heal things. I think to some degree it worked, although it's quite a tall order, that some things can't be healed in one day. But anyway, long story short, was I not sharing my screen that whole time?
No, I saw.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah, I saw it all.
Okay, sorry, I confused myself for a second. So yeah, long story short, Venus retrograde does tend to represent or coincide with these moments when hostile parties can come to some new understanding or agreement, or I think that's the role that gets played by the planet, astrologically speaking, in these instances. So speaking to, this doesn't negate all the stuff that you're pointing out about Saturn and Aries. Although, for instance, you mentioned the FBI. The FBI was created during a Venus retrograde as well. So some of these things, overlap very nicely. In fact, that Venus retrograde that the FBI was created under, it was a red 3, and the red 3 continued to be J. Edgar Hoover's. It was founded. The institution that was founded that would become the FBI, it was before J. Edgar Hoover took it over, and he would call it the FBI. But just like for the rest of his life, the red 3 retrograde, which is the Venus retrograde that went through Cancer and is now in Gemini, was always, always, always prominent in his life. Like that's a whole talk in and of itself, right up to his death. He died during a red 3, but everything about, like, he was appointed the head of the FBI in the red 3. The F3 was founded. The FBI was founded during a red 3, and just all kinds of other stuff. COINTELPRO, one of the things he's most famous for, he instituted that during the red 3 of 1956. It just goes on and on. So it's one of those really amazing things.
But I thought Venus was about love and romance, Nick.
It's about breaking up and coming together and resolving differences or things just blowing up because they're not resolvable.
Peace treaties that certainly makes sense for Venus, just in the general signification of Venus. But it's interesting how many of the findings you've made with Venus kind of challenge the basic assumptions that astrologers have about Venus, that it's like always it always means good things. And your research seems to show that it's actually more complex than that. That Venus
Absolutely.
cycles almost kind of mirror like the ups and downs of like social
Interaction. Yeah, absolutely.
interactions.
Look, when you have any kind of like bias, racism or bias against religion or against poor people or whatever the case may be, any of those sort of those things, these are Venus subjects. If you don't like someone because of the color of their skin, that's a sort of Venus area.
A
um
Venus problem.
yeah, it's a Venus problem. Yeah,
Yeah,
so yeah, they have everything to do with human interaction. And unless you think that the history of human interaction has just been one positive love fest after another, then you're
right,
both historically illiterate and astrologically mistaken at once.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because we typically also think of Mars as being um the main sort of opposite to Venus, and it still is, but it seems like Venus just by itself, when it's challenged, especially when it's going through those red phases, as it goes, those seem to be those moments where like the needle has to be threaded,
Yeah.
when Venus is in that red phase. Which, for everyone who is watching this and going, what is the red phase? That's basically, let me make sure I
Red
get this right.
interval. Red interval. You're actually
Red
you're
interval.
you're screwing up the terminology,
Oh
but
no. Okay, thanks.
but
Thanks.
thank you.
Thanks for correcting me.
Yeah.
So the red interval begins at the
Greatest
elongation.
the greatest elongation. The red intervals begin and end with the greatest elongation of Venus. So when Venus is an evening star, it's at its greatest distance from the sun, before, like, as it's stationing to go retrograde, at which point it'll gradually sort of, the sun will catch up with it in a way. And then at the tail end, after the direct station, when Venus is going to start moving forward and approaching the sun, it's again at its greatest distance, its greatest elongation from the sun on the other side. So yeah, there is something very sort of like everything pertaining to Venus, there's something very symmetrical and mathematically near perfect about the cycle and the way it can be measured. And yeah, so and as we remind people, if this is your first time watching the live stream, I have a really useful video on my YouTube channel called Introduction to the Venus Synodic Cycle. And if all this talk about red one and interval this and phase that is confusing to you, it should clarify. It's like an 11-12 minute video. I've started calling this system the PIM, the phase interval map, or sometimes the VPIM, the Venus phase interval map, although the V is kind of redundant, unless I start doing it for Mercury as well, which at some
Well, I was
point
going to say you could apply this same type of thinking. But one question I had for you actually about the blue intervals is,
yes,
the blue intervals start at the roughly at the heliacal rising and setting of Venus. That's the boundary of the blue periods, correct?
it's close. That can be the thing about heliacal rising and setting is it's a lot harder to sort of calculate. Like you can get a sort of official count, but the planet won't necessarily be visible when you expect it. It can be a little sooner, a little later.
So should we take that into account then for calculating the blue periods in a given location?
For the time being, I'll tell you, like, actually, this is a good time to introduce this. AstroSeek, Petter at AstroSeek has incorporated the PIM into like all the bells and whistles that you get at astroseek.com. For those of you who use astroseek.com to calculate charts or do your research, you can now calculate the Venus, the PIM on his site. And I also got a really interesting email from someone else who's set up a PIM counter, a PIM calculator. So these things are really sort of coming alive.
Yeah, I also made one too.
That's right. You also made one.
Pretty elaborate spreadsheet calculator.
Spreadsheet calculator, exactly. Yeah.
I tried to. So that was one thing I kind of struggled with, because I like the averaged out version you use, where you're using 73 days prior and after a given Sun Venus conjunction. But I also had this question of, but the astronomical limitation of
That's
visibility would be
that's
like a proper blue period.
yeah, that's what I'm thinking about doing that with the blue period. Thanks to the Petter at AstroSeek. Before I was going to ask him to do this, and he just had the innate wisdom to do it, on his own. He gives the option for the red intervals to calculate them either just the strict 73 days on either side, or using the greatest elongations as the boundary. And I'd love it. I'd love if we can really sort of get the blue intervals, something equivalent to that, using a sort of natural boundary, for want of
Yeah.
a better term, would be really great. But yeah, I don't know. I'm just
Yeah,
not at
it
the
just
point yet, but it
depends
could be.
on like where on Earth you are, which actually has really interesting implications, because it could mean that there are some places where Venus appears before other places. And so I would wonder if that even tells us like where
That
on Earth,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No,
Venus
exactly.
appears.
We always need to remind ourselves and everyone else, astrology is a visual medium. I mean, really doing astrology means really looking at the planets in the sky, which a lot of us don't have the chance to do. That was the nice thing in Cape Town, is I have this just sort of a perfect viewpoint where I can watch planets rise in the east. And I tried really sort of like watching every morning for Venus to make its heliacal rising. And then, of course, you get your cloudy days, and then, after like 4 cloudy days, it shows up, and you're like, oh shit, maybe it was 3 days ago, but it was too cloudy to see. And so there's kind of the luck of the draw there. But yeah, different parts of the world, depending on atmospheric, conditions and what have you, you might see it sooner or later. So it's a bit more, yeah, a bit more sort of nebulous and mutable, trying to determine
The exact blue periods.
yeah, well, I mean,
Yeah.
it would be
The
nice to
red
do
periods are defined, like
the
the
red, yeah,
elongations are
yeah,
very
yeah,
close. Yeah.
that's gonna be true no matter what, because that's just sort of looking at that distance. It would be nice to have some kind of equivalent for the blue intervals, and maybe as we move along, that'll
Yeah.
sort of make more sense. But I'm being very sort of, 1 foot on the brakes, 1 foot on the gas with
Well,
with that.
definitely talk to Peta, because he's amazing at like getting things done really, really quickly.
And just, I mean, what really impressed me was he was ready. Like, I was about to say, oh, by the way, Petter, this one thing that I'd like to do, and he just came out and asked me, hey, by the way, do you want me to do this or that, or offer the choice of both? I'm like, yeah, let's offer the choice of both. Like, let's, this is still sort of an exploratory, I don't have all the answers regarding Venus. It's probably gonna pass on from me to a bunch of you out there, or people who maybe aren't even born yet. All I can attest is this is, an area of astrology that's really, really worth developing and exploring. And thanks to Petter, more people can do that. One of my past solo streams not long ago, I spent about half the stream answering questions. Everyone wanted to know what interval they were born under, and I had nothing to offer them at the time that they could go and look it up themselves. So I just sort of, we had fun.
Looks like Kai made a calculator as well.
Yes, Kai wrote a calculator.
They said they wrote a calculator this week.
Yeah, so there you go. I mean, there's a lot of really, I don't think you can have enough of them, and I'm obviously I'm excited that people are really taking this up and running with it. So
because I think one thing that's kind of held people's study of the Venus retrogrades back a little bit is that it seems like maybe you're making the aperture too wide. You're kind of casting the net a little too wide with the retrogrades, because the red periods encompass the retrograde and a fair amount of time on either side of it. But you do see that happen. Like when you're studying these chronologies, you see that like these, you can still see like the 8-year resonances, but they often happen like sometime after the retrograde is completed. And I think that's kind of confused people, because they're like, well, but Venus is in Scorpio at this point. Why would I see this as being related to the previous Venus retrograde in Leo or something like that? But,
sure, that does make sense. I mean, first of all, even though as expansive as it is, the red intervals still only account for a quarter of total time, and any single, like the red 1 interval occurs once every 8 years for 146 days.
Right.
It's 5% of total time. And so when you can come up with all these chronologies, as I do, that just sort of layer the same interval over and over in repetition and a sort of theme running through it, yeah, it gets harder to sort of take that argument seriously. And then, the other thing is, again, going back to Venus as a visual medium. If you're really like this is why in the introduction to the Venus cycle video that I included all that enemy animation where you see Venus and the sun and their interaction, because it really gives you a sense of what that whole dance involves. And it is a little more sophisticated than merely measuring Venus from its so-called shadow points where where you're just looking at the retrograde. When you're watching the motion of Venus during those red intervals, the whole arc of it there's a distinction to that part of its cycle and its motion that's different from the rest of the cycle. From the white, black, or blue intervals. So yeah, I think like visually it makes sense, conceptually it makes sense, and in terms of like how the data sort of plays out when you're doing research, it makes sense in that way too. I think it's just it's unfamiliar to people, first off because it's a lot more about timing than interpretation. I mean, I am working in interpretations, but it's a lot more just sort of rudimentary. I've likened it to, if you're a musician, studying music, some of that involves playing, pieces of music beautifully with all the emotion. But before you get there, you got to do a lot of scales and a lot of stuff that's just sort of rudimentary in order to.
This is scales.
Yeah, this is scales. Learning the Venus synodic intervals is scales. So it can lead to some really exciting astrological insights, but more than anything, it's helping you understand time and Venus's place in time, and really having a sense of where it is in its cycle at any given point in time.
Now, I don't mean to put you on the spot about this, Nick.
Put me on the spot, Patrick.
But I'm curious, do you happen to know offhand what the relationship is between Venus's latitude and the various intervals? Like red threes, are they always north?
No. I mean, the latitude and declination these are sort of zodiacal. They're calculated relevant to the ecliptic and the where the sun is at a given time, and any of the intervals, over time they move through the signs, right? I mean, like in the 21st century.
But the latitude, though, is only dependent on the sun and the planet, though. Like, I understand what you're saying about declination, but I guess what I'm trying to figure out, I mean, I guess I could just find this out for myself, but I just didn't know if you'd looked at that, because I would think that would be another way of potentially understanding
all my slides, on all my slides, I do put down the latitude, but I can't say that, there's like I see variations in latitude for any of the intervals depending on when they're calculated. It doesn't seem to be
an 8-year cycle as well.
If it is, I'm really going to have to look a lot more carefully. But I've made a lot of slides and I've noted latitude on all of them, like the ones I was just showing a few minutes ago. And I can't say, at least an observation, that I see the latitude sort of forming any kind of pattern parallel to the changes in intervals. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's worth looking deeper. But it's not like I haven't been looking, and it hasn't struck me yet. It hasn't. These things. That's the way I work. Is they really have to leap out and smack me in the face before I sort of pay attention, and so that just hasn't happened yet. But excellent question.
Right now, I'm just looking at, for example, Venus retrogrades. So, red fives.
Red fives.
So it looks like,
which is where we are now. The red 5, for those of you who don't know, is the Venus retrograde in Leo.
So which in the south in latitude right now.
Yeah, in the 20th century. That the red 5 Venus retrogrades were in Virgo, and then in the 19th century they were in Libra. So over time they recede through the signs.
Okay, something kind of interesting, Nick, is that the red fives have been getting more southern. Like they're moving
Yeah.
in a southern direction. So in general, red fives are south. Like it's almost in this at the same degree of latitude when I go back every 8 years. So there must be a latitudinal relationship between the Venus and the Sun that corresponds to its longitudinal
Yeah, which is
return every 8 years.
yeah. Here, let me pull up my red 5 slides, because what you need to look at them over a few hundred years for it to,
Sure.
either form a pattern or not. So here's my red 5s. These are just, this is going to be a bunch of red 5 births. I'll set it up at the beginning. Let's explore this together. Maybe,
maybe so. You'll come out. Well, because, for example, I've been struck by the fact that you mentioned, for example, that a lot of like really, really big music figures, were born during white ones.
White 3s.
Sorry, pardon me, white 3s.
Yeah.
And from that, well, actually, I don't know now if I messed up white 1, then maybe the rest of my correlation would. I was looking at like the members of my family, and I was like thinking of like which one's the star and which one has been the rebel and which one has been
Right.
And I sort of thought of my families of like the cast of characters in terms of their Venus phase interval.
Right.
That it suddenly struck me that a few of the ways you described some of the characters from the different phase intervals, they sort of almost matched some of the character types, I guess you could say, that like family members fit into. And so it sort of made me wonder, like, I wonder if this is a way to examine like the kind of the meanings, I guess you could say, or interpretations of these different Venus.
Yeah, it's hard to. I mean, one of the reasons I designed the PIM is to be able to study these cycles over long periods of time.
Mm-hmm.
So the white 3 musicians that that I named, excuse me, Miles Davis, Stevie Wonder, Paul McCartney, Prince, Michael Jackson. Miles Davis was born the 36 years before. Wait, is that no? Am I doing the math correctly? He was born in 1926, and Michael Jackson was born in 1958. So yeah, 32 years rather. There's 32 years between sort of the oldest in that group and the youngest, which isn't that much time, and maybe it's so, I want to go back and look at like 19th century musicians, 18th century musicians, and see if it spans centuries, or if it's really sort of relegated to this one period in time when the white 3 was occurring in a certain part of the zodiac, and was it like sort of the morning star in that part of the zodiac that gave us all these amazing songwriters. I just wanted to show you, since I'm sharing the screen and I have these red 5s up. It really does look like it's relative to the sun. This is Frederick the Great, King Frederick II of Prussia. He's got the sun in Aquarius, and the latitude for Venus, this is Venus's latitude while the sun is in Aquarius, is at +3. But then when you get to a few Scorpios, like John Adams, the second president of US, he's got -5. This is, a Tsarina of Russia. This was the wife of Tsar Paul. And she also is a sun in Scorpio with Venus in Scorpio, and that's -6. Danton of the French Revolution, he's a Scorpio sun. He's got it at -6. Here's another Scorpio -1. You see, because Venus is now a morning star in Libra, as opposed to the previous Scorpios who have, Venus as an evening star, or under the beams evening star, or setting under the beams, I should say. It's -6. So you can see, like, by the time it gets here, it's at -1. So I think it really is just sort of relative to where the sun is still. And it's not, I don't think we can just sort of, if I jump ahead now, to modern times, people like Robert De Niro, okay, he's got it -5, but he's got the sun in Leo. Roger Waters from Pink Floyd, latitude at -8, and he's got the sun in Virgo. So it's hard to sort of pinpoint it the way you're trying to do. We need to sort of look at it a lot closer. Robin Williams is a -1 with the sun in Cancer. So I hope hopefully this isn't sort of confusing.
No. I think this is it's just taking into account the vertical dimension,
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. If we could get a sort of a clear idea of how latitude and declination are always sort of have their own sort of cyclical pattern that we see with Venus in these intervals, that would no doubt be a huge advance for us. But you can see in terms of how I'm doing things, it's not leaping out at me yet, and there has to be, whether it comes through me or whether it comes through someone else who winds up sort of picking up this research. It's really got to come out and, like I said, just slap you on the face and say, this is, you can't keep sort of overlooking this. You have to, which is how the Venus cycle sort of spoke to me in the first place. Was it just sort of made itself so obvious that I had to follow it down the rabbit hole.
Mm-hmm.
And here I am in a garage.
Yeah,
that's how deep it goes.
So it's funny because we talked about it a bit before, but Crushed Orchids asked, anybody have anything to say about this coming Venus retrograde in Leo? It's my second house, just paying off my credit card personally. Yeah, I mean, there's so much to say. Where to even start? With we're all almost in it already.
Yeah, we are. I mean, on the 4th on the 4th of June, we entered Red 5 with the greatest elongation. So we are now fully in Red 5. Yeah, I mean, this, whoops, sorry, I accidentally kicked my desk. One thing is, like, I hate to bring it up, but whenever I'm thinking of Venus retrograde in Leo these days, I'm thinking about damn last person I want to keep talking
about. Oh God damn
it. Yeah, like, I'm just like, I don't want to keep talking. But every time it comes up, it's like, yeah, he's a big part of it. Like it or not.
I guess it's just the Trump section of the talk now.
I know. I'm sorry, folks. Watson and I try not to speak of him, but if you're like, what does retrograde in Leo have to do with? Yeah, Donnie's part of it. Donnie's.
I know he's facing up to 400 years in prison if if he was charged with the maximum sort of penalty for what he's been charged with.
But for that to happen, the entire prosecution has to begin and end before November of 2024, when he has the potential to be elected. Because if he's elected before any prosecution can be, delivered, he's in the clear. And, so I know, look, everyone wants to celebrate that he's, got these new indictments on top of the other indictments, but I'm just like, yeah, it's, the system just isn't fast enough.
There's nothing in the Constitution though that prohibits him from necessarily serving as president if he were to be elected again. It doesn't prohibit someone who's indicted or convicted. I mean, he could theoretically be elected president from behind bars.
Yeah, well, that was the joke on the Daily Show.
Yeah,
like even if he doesn't win the election, if he gets sent to prison, he has to have Secret Service guys with him in prison. Like the Secret Service guys will have to. Like,
insane.
Like,
but
I
can think of a much. But the other big thing though is if he became president again, or if a Republican won, they could just pardon him.
Yeah.
And he does have Jupiter conjunct Uranus coming up on his midheaven. I mean, that is one thing that would literally just be able to wash this all away, is a presidential pardon. I hope to God that doesn't happen, right? But I see this, this big Uranus signature in his chart and the upcoming transits, and it just seems like something that could happen.
Yeah. I still like, I mean, I've said it enough. I don't want him to win. I think he is going to win. If I'm wrong, I'll be, astrologer pride be damned. I'd rather be wrong.
Right.
But no, I think he's going to be the dude. And just the fact, like, yeah, he's got a talent for worming out of things, and it's really a long shot. The system just doesn't move fast enough to convict him.
Right.
I mean, you're right. Like if some other Republican got it, if he did get convicted and then some other Republican was elected in his place, they would still probably pardon him, and it would be incredibly popular with that base. So, either way, it's, I think it's better. It's more sensible. I know like it's really upsetting to people,
Mm-hmm.
but I'd rather be sort of, I'd rather be, sort of awake and upset now rather than sort of, be wrong and have the reality hit you in November of 24.
Kira has just dropped in the comments here. She says, "Love it when you guys talk Trump." You must be one of the few.
You're the only one, Kira. Damn you, Kira. No, yeah, I know.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks for coming, and real pleasure to have you with us. But yeah, I'm glad you love to hear us talk Trump because we're always trying to avoid it.
Yeah, it's been honestly since he lost in 2020, it's just been a nice respite from having to think about it, and I think that's part of it is just for my own mental wellness to not talk about Trump. But someone
we
brought up a really good point.
Oh yeah, we'll come to that in a second. I wanted to point out just during the Trump years, you were very involved in following him astrologically, whereas I did what I usually do. I study people in history. When W was president, I didn't study his presidency. I waited till after he was gone. Then I started making charts and studying. I like to have that. I don't like to be emotionally involved in what I'm studying. And it's a lot easier, even if it's something that is unpleasant for me, to study it in hindsight as opposed to like in the day, in the moment. So as a consequence of this, I've really sort of been catching up on Trump's presidency, astrologically speaking, in the last few months. I watched a number of the debates. I've, developed my chart database so that it's sort of up to scratch. There's still some more stuff to add, but I'm catching up. But at the same time, I've been going through this period in the last 3-4 months where I've been watching a lot of Trump, the debates, the primary debates and the Hillary debates, old interviews. One thing I find interesting is just like over the last 40 years, how many of the greats of journalism have had interactions with him. There's, the Barbara Walters interview, the Mike Wallace interview, the Larry King, all these sort of figures who are now sort of, they've slipped through our, they're no longer sort of the people they were. Well, everyone I just named is dead. But there's this sort of the history of Trump and the American press is this other very interesting creature to unravel, and it's a great way to sort of actually study the history of American media in the last 40 years just by looking at his the different interviews he did. The last one I watched was with Charlie Rose, done in '92, and Charlie Rose is chiding Trump about being such a pig like with women, and it's just funny, like, right. Oh, well, hey, Charlie Rose, you're going to be canceled, 25 years after that interview, and Trump's going to keep on going. So there is this sort of, other interesting dynamic to studying his life that I'm discovering lately. I have to find something in the research that excites me. The other thing we mentioned in one of our past live streams, the discovery, the revelation we've had recently that part of the reason The Celebrity Apprentice was such a smash hit was that the first, like he did 5 seasons of The Apprentice earlier in the 2000s, and it was gradually dying in the ratings, and it was going to get canceled. But then the writer's strike happened. As sort of at the tail end of Red 5 going into White 4 of 2007, and the Mars retrograde that went from Cancer to Gemini, and suddenly, boom, he had his first season of The Celebrity Apprentice, which obviously was suddenly he had all these celebrities in the show, and it wasn't just him telling random unknown people they're fired. Now he's firing, Gilbert Gottfried or whoever, and it was this smash hit of a show. and that the writer's strike sort of contributed to that. And it's again, an interesting study of American media, the history of American media, with Trump happens to be sort of in the middle of that storm.
Reluctant Orca, Crushed Orchids brought up a really good point, which is that when did they say this? Oh, if gun control is likely to pass in 2025 to 2026, I can't see him getting elected then. I mean, obviously, here's hoping that doesn't happen, but I also think that it would be possible for him to still one, it would be possible for gun control legislation to be passed on a state level, not necessarily a federal level. It wouldn't necessarily have to be from the federal level. I mean, ideally it should, but the other thing is Trump wouldn't necessarily have to win in order to still get out of prison. Say DeSantis wins somehow, he would just be pardoned, and that's one of the potential scenarios that would probably stop him from going to prison and facing the consequences of his actions.
Yeah, but again, if there's going to be a conviction, it would be after the election, and I don't, so for that scenario to happen, DeSantis would somehow have to wind up being the candidate over Trump.
Right.
And I just,
yeah, I'm
hoping, yeah, well, it is too early. Again, I'd be thrilled to be wrong, but every time I bring this up, someone brings up Trump's under indictment. There's no way he can be elected. And I'm like, yeah, I know. I want.
That's what happened last. Yeah,
I want to
never happen. He always seems to thrive under that kind of expectation.
And I think to be honest, his presidency was a shit show, but it could have been way worse. I found, I was tucked away safely in South Africa, but I found it, it was hilarious. Every day he would have some just utterly stupid tweet, and that would be all the press would talk about. And, all these satirists, who usually make, great comedic hay out of the antics of politicians, your Stephen Colbert's and people like that. It just got to the point where how are we supposed to make this any funnier than it already is? He's a comedic force in his own right. But my point being that I think 47 is going to be a very different animal than 45. 45 really was a clown show. 47 I think it just, to my mind, has a darker, more ominous feeling to it. I hate to go even darker than I already have, but that's my sense of things astrologically and just sort of logically.
Well, I've also thought it was kind of eerie that on an inauguration day of 2025, January 20th, 2025 at noon in Washington, D.C., that will be not. The sun's always in early Aquarius for the inauguration for as long as it's been on that date, but this time it will be conjunct Pluto. So if it's always in the 10th house as well. So it's a natural, symbol for the power of the executive. But this is the first time that the sun on the inauguration chart will be conjunct Pluto, signifying, I think, ever. So ever. Yeah. So it'll be a president that really is kind of unlike the others in some way. And given Pluto's worrying connotations with power and extreme powers, and it would make me think that the next president is and I hope I'm not digging a grave here for myself.
I'm safely in Canada, man. Although I guess you can send a drone after me too.
The next president would probably be someone who will be seen as a really imperious and overreaching, surveilling Pluto-like president, which is another reason why I'm not sure that would be Trump. It could maybe make sense from a different point of view. Say, for whatever reason, Kamala Harris becomes the next president. Then it takes on a different flavor. It's not because she's necessarily an evil Pluto figure, but just because it's such a transformative shift away from what's happened before, where it's like the cycle of old dudes being president, most of them white, vast majority of them white. Now the face of power, the seat of power is with a black woman in a country like the United States, which I think would be powerful for sure.
Yeah.
Pluto, but
but
that's the positive version of it.
Yeah. I mean, someone just asked a second ago. Zeke asked. I always say Trump will win based on his chart. If I checked Biden's chart to confirm he will lose. Yeah. I mean, we could go into this too. It's to some extent yes, but even more so, Kamala Harris with Jupiter in the 12th house has a terrific. The thing about Jupiter in the 12th house, it's sort of like, it's kind of this blessing. It doesn't necessarily mean that the person is always a good person or is always successful or what have you, but there's this sort of like, I find Jupiter in the 12th house has this you always land on your feet, or there's always some sort of like fairy godmother or whatever, or helping angel, people sort of getting through life and sort of handing them opportunities. The thing about having Jupiter in the 12th house is what you wind up getting is no matter what perfection you're a person is in, Jupiter tends to sort of transit into the perfected sign over the course of a given year. And you really, if you look at people like that, you see like, the transit of Jupiter from sign to sign will sort of parallel their ups and downs in life. But there is something sort of like floating on a cloud about Jupiter in the 12th. And Harris has this in a way, like, let's face it, she's even less popular than Biden. And does not look like a promising candidate just in terms of popularity. But easily, we can easily find ourselves, Biden's old, he, for one reason or another, either he literally passes away or just becomes too, infirm to serve. And Kamala Harris becomes sort of either president or at least acting president once we get to election time. And that's very hard. It's not impossible. For instance, John Tyler was, not he was a vice president to William Henry Harrison, who died in office, and Tyler became president, but his party opted not to sort of have him run for the next term once that term filled out. So that could happen to Kamala, but I think more likely than not, I see her as a more likely candidate in 2024 than Biden.
I have something to add on this. I'm not sure if I should. I mean, I guess I'm not exactly.
You don't agree?
Well, no. I actually, I do. I just one second. I'm trying to find you again. I accidentally clicked out, so now I'm trying to find you. There you are. So I can share my screen to sort of show something that I've been working on. Now, I initially presented this back on election day in 2020, before the results were announced or anything. I released I just kind of squeezed out my analysis of Joe Biden's zodiacal releasing.
Oh, good. Yeah, do this.
Now, one ambiguity about Joe Biden in this chart with zodiac releasing is that he has the lot of spirit in Gemini at 8:30 a.m., his recorded birth time, but 8:30 a.m. could be rounded. Mm-hmm. And if he was born even less than 2 minutes later, his lot of spirit would be in Cancer. So there is a little bit of ambiguity about whether or not his lot of spirit is in Gemini, or whether it's in Cancer. So you don't have to agree with me on this, but I think I can make a fairly good argument that his lot of spirit needs to be in Gemini to make the most sense of his zodiacal releasing from the lot of spirit. Now, if I'm correct, and I have a whole article on this you can read on my site about Joe Biden, the 2020 election and CR, to see my whole analysis of why I think Gemini makes the most sense. But if we make the assumption that he has the lot of spirit in Gemini, then he is in a really interesting period that relates back to a time when he decided not to run in an election. So let me briefly bring that up so you can see what I'm looking at. I'm just clearing everything off here to make sure I don't have anything up here that no one should see. Okay. People's private information, I mean,
Yeah.
Okay. And my nudes, whatever. Okay, so
I've got your nudes already. I can share them with everyone. They're quite artsy, actually.
Yes.
Patrick on a velvet carpet.
All right, can you see this? Can you see my screen?
Not yet. I think there we are. Now we can. Yeah.
Okay. So, as you can see, at 8:30 a.m., he has the lot of spirit really close to the end of Gemini. So if we release from the lot of spirit in Gemini, we can see that he entered the current period that he's in, this Virgo period, on December 19th, 2005. This is this is in the lead up to his 2008 run for president, which didn't work out very well. I remember
distinctly he dropped out just in early January.
Yes,
right when Obama was starting to become a contender.
Right. So here's what you should know. So he was into Virgo, Gemini when he announced that he was running for president in 2008. He announced on January 31st, 2007. In a biography of Biden, there's a quote from one of his senior communications aides who said that the definitive month that the Biden campaign ended, he said the Biden campaign got a stake through its heart was in June of 2007, because that was the month that Biden's fundraisers deserted him and they went to Hillary Clinton and they went to Obama. Both of those politicians had fundraisers in June where they basically said that the Biden team lost its funding in June of 2007. And you can see that June of 2007 occurred right in the range of the loosing of the bond to Pisces, which was May 30th, 2007 through June 29th, 2007. And so that is when it definitively ended. Now, if you look on the level 2 scale, so remember how I said he renounced that he was running for president in 2008 in the Gemini level 3? Well, in Gemini level 2, this in April of 2019, that was when he announced that he was running for president in 2020. Now, that was successful. So, in other words, the Virgo Gemini period of 2019 mirrored the same time frame in January of 2007. This happened within a larger scale Virgo period and a smaller scale Gemini period. Now, if this follows, then the period of June of 2007 should mirror what happens in the current time frame, which is April 19th, 2023 through April 13th, 2024. In theory, that smaller section of time in June of 2007, when there was a stake driven through the heart of his campaign, that in theory comes back in this time frame where he's announced his run for 2025. He announced just a few days after the loosing of the bond to Pisces. Now, another way that you can interpret loosings of the bond is by looking back at the previous time that sign was encountered on level 2. So the period that the Pisces loosing of the bond points back to is the Pisces period that was March 2nd, 2015 through to February 25th, 2016. Now, before the 2008 election, it was pretty typical for the sitting vice president, to run for election after the current president finished their term or lost the election or won a second term. So he was within his rights to run, and Biden really wanted to run in 2016, but he ultimately decided against it because his advisors told him that the energy was around Hillary Clinton, and there was also a lot of reporting that seemed to suggest that Obama himself was more supportive of Hillary running than he was of Biden running. And so the other big thing that happened to Biden in this time is his son died, and he was going through the grief of losing his son. And so he wasn't in a very good mental space to run for president. So on October 21st, 2015, he announced that he would not be running in the 2016 election. Now, oftentimes there is something that you do during the foreshadowing period that comes back in some transformed way when you get to losing the bond. And so if he, I've often thought, like, what would be bigger than a sitting vice president not running for re-election? And the answer would be a sitting
president not running for
sitting president who decides not to run for re-election. Now, this is weird because he's already announced that he's running. Now, if we look at the exact time that he announced he would not run for president in 2016, that happened October 21st, 2015. So that happened under Virgo, Pisces, Leo, Taurus. So if we do that exact same sequence, but after losing the bond, then we get to Virgo, Pisces, Leo, Taurus, December 8th to December 9th of 2023. So if we look at that time frame, I believe you'll find there's like the Sun-Mars conjunction on his sun. That happened just after it happened in his 12th house. There's a Sun-Mars conjunction that continues to move into Sagittarius right around his ascendant in this time. And if you look at Kamala Harris's chart, you'll see that Saturn is exactly conjunct her midheaven at that time. The thing that would make the most sense to me is that if I'm correct about all of this and all the assumptions I've made, that basically in early December, Biden would announce that he is, for whatever reason, can't run or doesn't want to continue running.
Or just becomes obvious that he can't.
Becomes obvious that he can't for some reason. And then Kamala would have to step in. And she's the one that is currently in her Fortune 10th period, from Zodiac releasing and everything. And because Saturn's conjunct her midheaven, that would make sense for the sudden weight of what she would be having to take on at that moment. And plus the filing deadlines to run for president they kind of expire in that time. So if she was going to run, she would have to do it right then in December in order to be on the ballot. Obviously, I think that Biden lives. I'm not saying Biden's going to die. I think that there's a few other reasons I think that Biden
he doesn't have to die. I mean, we're not have to
die for this to still make sense
for this to fall apart. It can be one or the other. I'm not predicting or not predicting whether he died. I mean, that's sort of beyond me to say, but I agree fully. Beautifully said, Watson. But I'm inclined to think that Kamala is like far ahead of Joe in terms of, astrologically speaking, in terms of things looking likely of her being, involved in the election.
One other kind of interesting thing you mentioned about Jupiter and Taurus in the 12th house. Another politician who has that combination is Tony Blair. He was born with Gemini rising, Pisces in the 10th, with the ruler Jupiter in Taurus in the 12th. And one thing that's kind of interesting about that is that he, before he ran for prime minister, there's this infamous story of him making this deal with his friend, the Gordon.
Gordon Brown.
Yeah, Gordon Brown. And he basically said, like, I'm going to run for 2 terms and then I'm going to hand it off to you.
Right.
But he kind of betrayed him. So we get some of the 12th house connotations of that placement, that he benefited. He was able to advance his own career in some ways at the expense of
Gordon Brown.
Of an ally. And so I would think then that maybe the corollary or the kind of correlating factor for Kamala Harris would be that she, I guess a basic delineation would be someone who is able to advance themselves professionally due to a bad situation, due to, or at the expense of, or because of a bad situation. Also interesting about Tony Blair is that he only got to be party leader because someone had died. That was the reason he was able to actually get his sort of foot in the door. And so it's interesting to think about the potential connection with Kamala Harris, who has that exact same placement, Jupiter and Taurus in the 12th house, ruling the 10th, advancing oneself due to misfortune, being able to luckily benefit in some ways from like things not going so well.
Yeah, and I mean, Crushed Orchid is saying, she can only see Kamala winning if her opponent is very hated or feared. It would take a miracle for her approval to rise that much in a short time. Look, I fully agree. Just because we're saying we think she might be the candidate doesn't mean we think she would win. Jupiter in the 12th isn't going to help her win an election. Jupiter in the 12th will help her sort of be maneuvered into a situation, not necessarily of her own doing, but just circumstantially of landing in the right place.
Benefiting from her opponent, right?
Yeah.
Jupiter in the 12th.
Exactly. No, I think, I think Trump would beat Kamala in an election, at least the way things stand now. And as I keep having to remind people, this is not what I want. It's just what I think will happen. And
one other kind of weird thing about Kamala and Trump is if you look at the transits of the 2024 election itself, which I think is November 5th, 2024, Venus will be in late Sagittarius on Trump's moon and on Kamala's descendant, and that will be opposite Jupiter in Gemini, almost to that exact same degree, right on Trump's sun and right on Kamala's ascendant.
Right.
So it's a weird combination of like we have the benefics in opposition, and for Trump, that opposition is happening across his natal sun-moon opposition.
Yeah, which is
but for Kamala, it's happening across her ascendant-descendant axis. So who does that benefit more? Who benefits more from that?
Yeah.
See, I still think that if a Republican were to win, even if it were not Trump, that Trump would still benefit from that because he could get his pardon. That's his way out. It's his ticket out. He wouldn't even necessarily have to be the candidate to still benefit from a Republican winning. On the other hand, that is still, a very pretty benefic looking configuration for Kamala Harris as well. So if these are the candidates,
well, I mean, look, I mean, despite her really low popularity ratings, if she winds up being a candidate for presidency almost by accident, that can justify those transits alone. She doesn't have to win in order for those to sort of work out. I'm also reminded this was true back in 2000 when W was running against Al Gore. I was studying with Michael Luton at the time in New York, and Luton said something that really is proven to be true over and over again. When you're trying to predict the outcome of a presidential election, the winner will be whoever is going to have the shittiest transits, excuse my French, for the next 4 years. Because I remember, Gore had like Sun, Moon, Pluto, Grand Trine, and there were all these transits that looked really sort of nice. It's like, yeah, because he's going to have the time off. He's not going to be dealing with 9/11 and, everything that fell in W's lap.
See, that's one thing that is a point then against Trump, though, because he won in 2016 when Saturn was on his moon. So, and so does it really make a whole lot of sense that in 2024 he would win with Jupiter on his sun? It seems like, if anything, he's off the hook. Like, he's off the hook again. All right.
Well, I mean, good point. And I hope you're right. I'm in this weird position. It's like, please prove me wrong.
Basically, the only thing that I feel like I know more for sure is that Biden will not serve a second term. So I don't know whether that's because he just elects not to run a second time, like he opts out of it, or
if it's just so obvious that like he had another fall the other day, a pretty bad one on stage. And that kind of thing. I kind of a mean, stupid joke that occurred to me. I guess I'll repeat it. Chris and I have been laughing about the fact that Joe was born so close to Jimi Hendrix, and when this happened, I'm like, well, just like Jimi Hendrix, he's tripped on stage. Sorry, terrible. I'm sorry.
What is kind of weird though is, and not to get too off track here, but Joe Biden was born November 20th, 1942, right? He was born within a week of the birth date of Obama's mother.
Yeah.
Which I thought was a bit strange. He picked someone who had the same transit as his mother. All right, but it gets weirder because
and Dunham,
his Obama's father was born, I think, in the same summer or the same year as McCain, and then Michelle Obama is born within a month of Sarah Palin.
Yeah.
You're like, wait a sec, what? It's like the same astrological cast of characters, are sort of showing up. And then so then that sort of got me thinking about who a president chooses to be their vice president, what how you might actually be able to guess at that based on the connections they might have to other people in their lives. And so I thought that was really interesting because back in 2016, when there was all this discussion about who Trump was going to choose as his vice president, the people at the three people at the top of that list were Mike Pence, who has the sun conjunct the moon in Gemini,
right?
Not dissimilar to Trump's sun in Gemini, opposite the moon. Right. Newt Gingrich, who was born with the sun in Gemini, opposite the moon in Sagittarius,
right,
like Trump. Or Giuliani, who was also born with the sun in Uranus, sun
conjunct in Gemini,
conjunct Uranus in Gemini. So he was trying to find someone who matched himself. He was trying to find, when Obama saw the vice president, he picked the guy who had the transit of his mother, the transit of his mother,
which is really because it's going back to
Trump just find himself.
If you remember when Obama was elected, it was considered a real sort of daring move that he made Hillary the Secretary of State and Biden the VP, because everyone sort of thought the natural choice would be the other way around. Right. And that was when this whole, Obama reading Team of Rivals by Doris Chase Goodwin about Abraham Lincoln, the Abraham Lincoln biography that Spielberg used for his movie. And the whole idea that Obama was sort of channeling Lincoln in terms of how he was taking his rivals and putting them in positions where they could be really useful, but wouldn't have been considered the sort of natural choice for the people involved. So there's that element to it as well.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, I have to say I've got a client in a little over half an hour.
Okay, yeah. Well, then we better go.
This has been fantastic, and better to sort of run away while we're still hot. These live streams just keep getting better and better and more popular. I can see we have record attendance now. We've kind of doubled, I think, our previous record, close to it.
See, this is what happens when you talk about me, okay? When you talk about me, your ratings go up, all right?
I have the best enemies. I have the best haters. My haters are awesome.
My transits are the best.
Just on and on.
All right. Well, we left it. There are still some questions that are really great that we're leaving open-ended, but that just means you folks have to come back next Sunday for the next team stream, and we'll try and touch on those. But yeah, I want to thank everyone for turning up. I want to thank you, Watson, for joining me today. And,
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. No, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. We're the Chipmunks and the Warner Brothers cartoons. After you, sir. No, after you. Thank you. All right, cool. So yeah, as usual, I'm doing my solo live stream tomorrow. If you want to check me out, 2 p.m. Eastern. I'll be doing whatever I manage to do when I don't have the lovely and talented Patrick Watson by my side. I can be reached at nickdaganbestastrologer.com, available as always for consultations. And Patrick,
I can be found at patrickwatsonAstrology.com, and you can also find me at pwatsonastro on Twitter while it still exists, and at pwatsonastro.bsky.social on Blue Sky. And actually, Nick Dagan Best is on Blue Sky as well.
I'm on Blue Sky and I'm on Mastodon. I haven't done anything with them yet. I'm wondering if I should try live streaming to those.
Maybe.
I got to add them. I got to add them in, and we'll start, getting people wandering in from those platforms as well. Well, this has been a lot of fun. Somehow we managed to talk about Trump again. People don't seem to actually be. I thought we'd be sort of the people rolling their eyes, like, oh God, not that asshole again. But yeah, apparently people like it when we talk about him. So against our creator, we'd love to say, well, screw you, we're not going to talk about him anymore. But that would be a lie. It'll no doubt come up again. But in the meantime, we'll always try to talk about a variety of topics here on our team stream.
Team stream, I like that.
Team stream, yeah. The team stream, the solo stream, yeah. There we are. I don't know if I should trademark that or anything. It's kind of gross. Anyway, all right, folks, have yourselves a fantastic Sunday. I hope to see a lot of you on my solo stream tomorrow. And Patrick, I'll see you next Sunday.
See you then. Bye,
All
guys.
right. Bye, everyone. Thank you.